morning and welcome to MEC's Capital Day. What a great day to be here. What a beautiful day in Jackson, and we're very excited about what's ahead. You know, it's really great to be back holding this the first week of the legislative session. As you know, we've had some challenges the last couple of years that have caused us to do things differently. But right now, we're really excited about MEC's Capital Day being on the first Thursday of the session. What a fun way to kind of kick off what's happening from a legislative standpoint. What a fun way to actually have the opportunity to, going back to the Capitol today, to visit with legislators and really see what's going on. We really do have a special session planned for this morning, though. In just a few minutes, Governor Tate Reeves will be joining us for a conversation about what's happening across the state. We have a great group of education and workforce leaders here to discuss what the business community can do to really make sure we're collaborating in a way to make a difference in the outcomes and preparing the workforce of the future. And then we're going to talk to some of our partnering organizations about what to expect during this legislative session and ways that we can all work together to make a difference. But first, it is really my pleasure to introduce Martin Williams. He is the Vice President and CFO of Corinth and Tupelo Coke, and he is serving as the MEC Chair this year. So Martin, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
You know, Martin is the fourth chair to serve as a second generation chair of MEC. His father, Kenneth, was chair in 1991 and 92. And I think, obviously, Martin, just the commitment from your family, from your company, believing in the mission of MEC's role of the voice of business. Talk a little bit about that and the role MEC plays in helping develop public policy and why that's so important for us in our state.
Absolutely, will do, Scott. But first, let me take just a quick moment to say thank you for being here and welcome. So proud and happy to see you all here the first week of the legislative session to help us figure out how to move Mississippi forward and make it a better place. But our role at MEC, the way that I see it, is a statewide function, right? And I like to use the adage of a rising tide lifts all boats. If MEC can help Mississippi be a better place to own and operate a business, then all of our businesses will benefit. And we're very good at working, we as an organization, you and your team are very good at working together with elected officials and really making a difference in Mississippi. And I think that's pretty well evidenced, if you don't already know, by the fact that we won the State Chamber of the Year Award. And so I'd love to recognize Scott and the team for that accomplishment. That was a big deal.
You know, as I mentioned earlier, we're very excited about being able to go back to the Capitol. We'll take some buses up there in just about an hour, go to room 216 and hear from legislative leaders up there. What makes Capitol Day so special, being able to do those types of things?
Well, I think it's a huge benefit having this group of people come to Jackson, be able to see one another for one thing, which is excellent, and then also make our way over to the Capitol, meet with our legislators, talk about things that can make Mississippi, continue to make Mississippi great, and really discuss, have conversations with our elected officials about what matters most to each of you in your hometowns and organizations.
You know, in talking about what matters, in early last year, we released Securing Mississippi's Future Vision for Economic Growth. It was a report that was done by going out and listening to what people had to say and what was important to them. You know, it outlined 5 goals, and there were several recommendations under each of those. Why is it important that we continue to focus on this effort of moving our state forward?
Yeah, I see Securing Mississippi's Future report as our really strategic roadmap. Where are we going and what do we need to operate? What do we need to work on every day? And for those of you who don't know or haven't heard this from Scott himself say it many times, he literally keeps the report on the front of his desk so that he knows what he needs to be working on every day and what the organization, in what direction the organization needs to be pointed. It's going to and has already and will continue to guide our organization to help improve workforce, grow jobs, and lead to a strong economic environment in the state.
And this is something everyone can have a role in, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's got to be a public and private sector cooperation. That's really the most important thing for us to be able to reach our potential, our fullest potential.
Any final thoughts?
Well, I do want to thank the governor very much for being here and participating with us, the other legislative officials that are going to be speaking to us later. I think it's really important for us to hear them so that we can improve on being the voice of business, which is our goal for the MEC. I think it's really important and will only help us to understand what's going on.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time, your dedication to MEC. Your role as chair has been tremendous. I think everybody here appreciates what's taking place, and we appreciate you joining us for a couple of minutes this morning. Coming up in just a second, Governor Tate Reeves. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Governor Tate Reeves. Governor, thank you for being with us. I appreciate it. We just showed a video that we produced back in October. We debuted it at Hobnob. It really focuses on some of the great things about Mississippi, some things we have a lot to be proud of. When we debuted it at Hobnob, that was about 4 or 5 days before what become the biggest economic development announcement in the state of Mississippi. One more thing to be very proud of. Talk a little bit about, if you would, kind of why that's so important for our state and what it's going to do to help, basically use that as a catalyst to move our state forward.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thanks to all of you for being here today. It's a really great opportunity to bring the business community together and meet with government leaders. Before I talk about that project that you asked about, I just want to reiterate to everyone in the room, I'm sure you've heard me say this because I've said it a lot over the last few months, but if you take that particular project out of the equation, over the last 8 years before I became governor, we averaged about $900 million a year in new capital expenditures in the state. If you take SDI out of the equations, we did $3.5 billion in 2022 alone without the largest economic development project. If you include SDI, we did $6 billion in new capital expenditures in Mississippi in 2022 alone. And as you all know, that's with an overall GDP of about $120 billion. And so the thing that I think made great sense about this project, and I will tell you, we've gone through an extensive effort over the last 3 years to ensure that we are doing ROIs on every state expenditure and new economic development project so that we ensure that we know not only what is our ROI at the state level, but we also know what the ROIs are at the local level, and we understand what the company is looking to do so as to try to minimize our risk. The special thing about this project, obviously, this is a company that currently exists in the state of Mississippi. They've been here for almost 15 years. They pay their employees at levels greater than what they have promised with this new 1,000 jobs, and they promised $93,000 a year for these additional 1,000 jobs. In addition to that, and I'm always the optimist, but we've spent a lot of time with the company leadership, and we've also seen what they're going to do with the 2,000 acres up in the Golden Triangle, and it's very similar to what the campus that they built down in South Texas over the last 3 years. And if you look at that particular campus, I think it's highly likely that not only will the company see and get to this 1,000 jobs over the next 2 to 4 years, you're going to see a lot more companies locate in that region. And you're going to see not only suppliers to SDI, but also end user customers locate in this industrial park, in this 2,000 acres. And because of that, I would not be surprised at all if, and they didn't guarantee this, and so we didn't headline it, but I think that the total number of jobs in this 2,000 acres could be twice what they have guaranteed and promised. And in a region of our state, like the Golden Triangle, what I would tell you is it's got a real opportunity to be a real game changer just for the entire region up in the Golden Triangle, and it's something that I'm exceptionally proud of. I'm proud of our team that they worked diligently. They traveled to other countries, they traveled to other continents working on this deal, and we really got it done in such a way where we did it very quickly. We were very private about it. No one knew about it. And there was a reason for that, because that's what the company wanted.
Well, and you mentioned the fact that in 2022 that, $6 billion, but with that comes a total of more than 5,000 jobs total in those projects. And while the big one is the one that gets all the headlines, sometimes those smaller ones are just as important, particularly small communities. Why is it important that you look at it from to use a baseball analogy, you like to hit the home run, but the singles and the doubles are important too, right?
Well, no question, and I will tell you, it's been intentional that we've gone after what I would call a single and double from the state's perspective, because we live in a very rural state. And look, it is natural for politicians who get elected every 4 years to focus on the big fish, the big project, the one that gets you above the fold on the front page of the newspaper. That's just a natural inkling to love that. But in reality, what I've told our team is, look, we're going to take the opportunity when it presents itself, but I'm much more interested in seeing 10 projects at $200 million a year in 10 different communities situated throughout our state. Because while it may be a single and a double to me, if we get $200 million CapEx with 150 jobs paying $70,000 a year, when I was up in Alcorn County just a couple weeks ago announcing the new forest products business, I can assure you that there were this many people in attendance, and every one of them didn't see that as a single or a double. They thought it was a grand slam for their community. And when you look at the successes that we've had over the last 3 years, so many of these business locations that we have announced have been in that range: 150 million, 200 million, 130 jobs, 170 jobs. They're paying $60,000 a year, $70,000 a year, and we've really worked very, very hard to focus our incentives, because we live in a state with scarce resources, to focus our incentives on those potential projects that lead to per capita incomes going up in every region of our state. And so we're not incentivizing very many businesses that are locating, that are hiring people, regardless of how many people they hire, that are paying below the county average wage. We're just not doing that anymore. And that's not always easy for everyone, and change is sometimes difficult, but I really do believe that that's what's in the best interest of the state long term.
Yeah. Well, I want to shift just over to education for just a minute. Over the last 10 years, but during your time as Lieutenant Governor and now as Governor, we've seen great strides made in education. And one of the things that has, I think, helped this is what's commonly referred to as the third grade reading gate. Can you talk a little bit about what that's meant and what you think it's going to mean for our future in terms of educating our kids in the state? Yeah,
so let me begin by saying there are those who still like to say that Mississippi is 50th in everything, and specifically Mississippi is 50th in public education. And there are those who certainly continue to say that, and that is their prerogative. They can lie all they want to lie. But now it's just not true anymore. Because of conservative educational reforms that we enacted mostly in 2012, 2013, and 2014, where we find ourselves today is in a totally different hemisphere than where we were just 10 years ago. For instance, when the day I was sworn in as Lieutenant Governor in January of 2012, the average high school graduation rate in America was 84.5%. In Mississippi, it was 72.5%. We've been doing public education the same way for years and years and years, and that's where we were. Last year, the high school graduation rate in America rose from 84.5% to 86.5% over that 10-year period. In Mississippi, we went from 72.5% to 88.5% high school graduation rate. That is the highest it has ever been in Mississippi. We have the highest graduation rate, the lowest dropout rate in the history of our state. And that's something we ought to be proud of, and we ought to brag about it. And it shouldn't matter what political party you're in or what part of the state you're in or whether you have kids or not. I mean, it's a big deal that we're above the national average in high school graduation rates. But it was because of conservative education reforms and putting accountability measures in place. Having said that, and I don't think any of us fully appreciated or knew at the time, in my opinion, the single most important piece of legislation that has been passed in Mississippi, certainly during my tenure in government, which, believe it or not, is in year 20 now, but I think probably the single biggest, most important piece of legislation ever passed in the history of our state with respect to education, and maybe with respect to anything, was what they like to call the Literacy Promotion Act. We called it the third grade gate, and some people got offended by that, but in essence, that's what it is. If you're not reading at a certain level when you leave the third grade, then you don't get to go to the fourth grade in the state of Mississippi. Now, when we first passed it, there was a lot of concern that, hey, 50% of our kids are going to end up staying in the third grade. But guess what? Mississippians have done what Mississippians do. When you raise the level of expectations, we come together and we figure out a way to meet those increased expectations. And so the third grade reading gate has done wonders for kids across Mississippi. And I mean kids from every geographic region, kids from every race, kids everywhere are reading better because of that piece of legislation. I want to give you one final statistic. By the way, overall, our educational system has gone from 50th in America 10 years ago to 32nd to 34th today. Now, to be fair, 50th wasn't good enough 10 years ago, and 32nd to 34th isn't good enough today. There are two ranking systems. One's 32nd, one's 34th. 32nd, 34th isn't good enough today, and so we got to keep working on it. But guys and girls, we are making some tremendous progress. Here's a statistic that I looked up just the other day because I happened to see it on Twitter. It was one of my colleagues, a governor from another state, bragging about it. Fourth grade reading skills. And I'll credit this to not only the legislation that was passed, but the way in which the department implemented it. Fourth grade reading skills in each of the last 3 years, we're in the top 5 in America in 10-year growth numbers overall. But here's a statistic. 10 years ago, in 2012, African American fourth graders, when compared to their peers in other states, scored 46th best. In 2022, they scored 4th best in America. My friends, that's going to open up a whole new set of opportunities because, as I've told a lot of folks who are looking to invest capital here, we have the data proves it. We have the smartest, and it's hard for us as Mississippians to say this, but it's a fact. We have the smartest fourth graders in the southeastern United States today, based upon the data. The smartest fourth graders in the United States. Guess what? In 10 years, those fourth graders are going to allow for us to have the smartest workforce in the southeastern United States. And that's going to give us a competitive advantage when seeing economic growth.
And that's a great segue into my next thing, and that's lifelong learning. And you've been very instrumental in the development of the Office of Workforce Development, the importance of that. I know this office in a lot of ways is still in its infancy, But really, how is it, the collaboration that's beginning to happen there, the effort is so, why is that so crucial for workforce?
Well, because we've got to constantly train and retrain our workforce for the jobs, not of the last 50 years, but the jobs for the next 50 years. It's the reason I was so involved in strongly encouraging the legislature to create this office. It's also the reason that when we made appointments to the executive board and to the larger board, and you may or may not know this, but Scott has served on that board representing business interests, that it was critically important that government not run our Office of Workforce Development, but business and industry run our Office of Workforce Development, because who knows better what the demands are going to be 2 and 5 and 10 years from now than you do, those who actually employ people every single day all across Mississippi. I think it's critically important. I think when we passed that legislation in 2020, creating the office, I really do think it was a game changer for the next 10 to 20 years. And I think you'll probably hear from Ryan later today on some of the efforts that he is spearheading, and he and I are working very closely together on those. But the concept is pretty simple. If we know, for instance, that over the last 5 years that we've had 500 job openings for diesel mechanics who on average earn over $100,000 a year, but we're only producing 100 diesel mechanics a year, well, we have a supply and demand issue, and we need to figure out how we can fix that. And so that's a prime example of where we've invested with Dr. Mary Graham on the Gulf Coast and other community colleges to expand their diesel mechanic programs so that we can produce more diesel mechanics, because obviously every one of them that graduates gets what's most important from that program, and that is a JOB.
Well, and that's exactly right, because one of the things that we're working on right now is our Sit to 55 effort of raising educational attainment. It all comes back to kind of what you talked about in per capita income. If we're putting people in the right pathway to get the right jobs, it's going to make a difference long term, and I think that's key.
No doubt, and by the way, that's the reason I advocated for the legislature funded $8 million of career coaches. Mm-hmm. We've seen in Northeast Mississippi particularly how career coaches have been successful. The way I think of it, and I'm sure that there's a lot smarter people that think of it in different ways, but when I was growing up, we had a counselor at my high school. She was a wonderful lady, and she helped make sure that I was taking the classes that I needed to take in high school so I could get into college and then ultimately be moderately successful when I was there. I see career coaches taking those individuals and those kids and working with them that maybe aren't going to go to college or aren't going to go to community college originally, and understanding what the opportunities are in their own communities for possible labor, and maybe what are the skills that they need to be learning when they're in the 11th and 12th grade to actually determine what those skills are, and then ultimately attain those skills so they can go to work when they graduate.
And that's key. We don't have but a couple of minutes, but I can't let you get away without talking about taxes. You've been very helpful on a lot of areas, that, particularly from a regulation standpoint a few years ago with some work that we did at MEC, and really we've seen some things happen over the last couple of years too. So just from your perspective, why is it important that we have a competitive tax system in the state?
Yeah, so in 2015 I proposed, and then ultimately in 2016 we passed as a legislature, when I was in the legislative branch, what was then the largest tax cut in Mississippi history. That tax cut was driven not only by reducing the personal income tax, but it was really heavily weighted towards reducing taxes that some of our corporations and small businesses paid that made Mississippi not competitive at that time. Obviously, last year we passed what is now the largest tax cut in Mississippi history, which was geared towards really moving us towards a flat tax from an income tax standpoint. Right now there are 50 states in the U.S., as best I can recall. Of those 50, there are 9 who do not have a personal income tax, and amongst the 41 who do have a personal income tax, Mississippi has the 5th lowest marginal rate in America. And oh, by the way, we also have the exemptions up to 36.5 is the highest exemption of any state in America that has an income tax. So it affects those on the lower end of the scale less so. Obviously, I'm going to continue to push for the elimination of the income tax. I think it would make us more competitive when we are looking at bringing particularly executives into the state, entrepreneurs into the state. We're at a big disadvantage when they know they got to take what is now a 5% haircut if they go to Texas or Tennessee or Florida versus locating here. And so I think it puts us at a competitive disadvantage. The one thing I want to just mention beyond taxes, because I know y'all are going over to the legislature, and for those of you who are involved in economic development efforts in your local communities, one of the things that I've I wouldn't say that I've changed my opinion of, but my opinion has certainly evolved over time, and that is the need for investing in infrastructure in and around sites, economic development sites, what we call our site development grant fund. 2 years ago, I went to the legislature and said, look, if y'all will appropriate $10 million bucks for site development, I can find $17 million in other areas, and we can spend $27 million on site development. Last year, I went back to them because I thought it worked so well that I asked them for $100 million, and going from 10 to 100 may have been a little bit aggressive. I get it. And so they cut me by 50%, but they gave me $50 million this year for site development. And my plan is to develop 30 sites around Mississippi that are moving towards being shovel ready for the next major economic development site. And I want to do it I want to have 30 sites in every region across the state. We were able to fund the first 10, the initial investments for the first 10 with the $27 million last year. We're going to soon announce how we're going to allocate the next $50 million. By the way, I'm not deciding which community gets the money and which communities don't. We're talking to actual site consultants and our people who are involved in economic development every day that are telling us which ones are most valuable and most likely to hit. But the SDI project, the largest in state history, the biggest advantage we had lots of advantages, but the biggest advantage we had was 2,000 acres already secured with infrastructure there. And so their speed to market was so much faster if they located in the Golden Triangle, Mississippi, than any other state they were looking at. And so we want to replicate that in your community. And I just need continued efforts, and I'm not suggesting that there's been any pushback, but continued efforts for everyone in the legislature to understand that this infrastructure investments is a really, really good investment with really positive long-term ROIs for the state of Mississippi. And I could go through where the best sites in the state are located. It's something that, when I got elected, I said I want to spend 95% of my time dealing with economic development and bringing jobs and improving per capita incomes in the state. Now, I haven't been able to spend 95% of my time in my first 3 years doing that because of the other things that have popped up. But that is something that is on my agenda that I think we certainly would align ourselves on, that site development monies, if you're involved in economic development at the local level, you appreciate how important and how transformative that can be. Because speed to market really matters. When I first came in 20 years ago, the first question I got in every economic development deal I ever went to with Haley Barber was, let's talk about incentives. Probably 5 to 7 years ago, the first question I always got was, let's talk about your workforce. And that's still, both are still important questions. But today, it's about speed to market. It's about how quickly can I start, how quickly can I get the permits done, how quickly can I start building, and how quickly can I start producing my product and getting it to market, because I don't get to make money on things that I'm not selling. And so I just want to mention that. It's really important, I think.
Well, thank you. And, you've said this, and I think a lot of people in this audience have probably heard me say this too. We have a great story to tell in Mississippi. We have to tell that story. We appreciate all that you're doing. We appreciate what has transpired. We look forward to working with you and continuing moving our state forward. And thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us this morning to talk about some of the things that are happening across the state.
It's been my privilege. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Joining us in just a minute, we're going to talk about workforce education and how y'all can be a part of it.
It's the sizzle in your bacon, the comfort in your cozy socks, the heat that can't be beat. With natural gas, saving money just feels natural. Atmos Energy, your natural gas.
Yeah, I'll move down. Doing good. How are you doing? All right.
Oh, that's better.
Well, guys, we're going to keep right on moving here, and I'm really excited about having the opportunity to have this next discussion, talking about education, workforce, skills training, and how the business community can be a part of that. And with us this morning, we have a wonderful panel, Dr. Al Rankins, who is the Commissioner of the Institutions of Higher Learning here in the state of Mississippi, Dr. Mary Graham, the President of Gulf Coast Community College, and then Ryan Miller, our Executive Director of the Accelerate Mississippi, which is our Office of Workforce Development that the Governor and I were just discussing. We really appreciate all of you joining us here this morning at Capitol Day, and feel like that this is really a great opportunity for us to think about how we can work together, if you will. And I want to just start by kind of going around the table and getting your thoughts on kind of why the partnership between the education and workforce community is so important. And Al, I'll start with you. And what can business leaders do to kind of make sure that we're ensuring that our students at our universities across the state are really getting the fundamentals necessary to succeed in today's workforce?
Thank you. Well, I think first, we need to continue to have dialogue with our university leaders and academic departments that house the majors, the student majors that you as business leaders are seeking to hire, and to continue to engage in strategic partnerships with our universities. There are several examples of symbiotic relationships between our universities and the private sector. Some great examples include the Center for Advanced Vehicular Systems at Mississippi State, and some of the great research they're doing and applying that research to address real-time issues like designing and refining production lines and workstations at the Nissan plant and other automotive companies. The relationship with Mississippi Valley State University, I see President Briggs in the audience now, that they have with FedEx Logistics, where students at Valley are manning a logistics site on their campus and tracking packages from their point of origin to their destination point, giving those students valued training, work experience, and financial assistance, while FedEx is creating a pipeline of potential full-time employees that graduate from Mississippi Valley State University fully trained and ready to work on day one. Or the many examples of small business incubator units on our university campuses that support entrepreneurs and small business development. These great relationships support more meaningful engagement between the private sector and our universities, listening to each other's needs, pivoting and making adjustments, and fostering success for our students when they enter the workforce.
You know, and I think those adjustments are a big part of that. And Mary, the community colleges deal with this on a lot of instances, particularly we're not only talking about educational advancement toward degrees, but also the industry certifications, the specific training that's needed. So how can businesses make sure they're part of that process as we go through this?
You know, Scott, I would almost reframe that question, because I feel like it's incumbent upon higher education to ensure that business and industry is a part of the conversation. And of course, on the business industry side, we want you to engage with us at the community college level so we can provide the services and the training that you deem necessary and appropriate. If there are particular certifications, certificates, different training programs that you need for your business and industry, we need to make sure that we're providing that type of training. And we can only do that if we hear from you and we collaborate with you. We hosted a workforce summit over a month ago on one of our campuses. We had over 70 business and industries attend with over 250 business leaders. it was a workforce solutions-driven conversation with business and industry, who shared with us what the competencies are that they need. And then we, in turn, in an attempt to be responsive and relevant, go in and really revamp some of our curriculums to make sure we're meeting those needs. Because if we're teaching from a 40 or 50-year-old curriculum or training from a dated curriculum, then we're not providing the resources and the services that we're tasked with providing. We're here to train the next generation of the workforce, and so we're trying to do that every day. So we ask business and industry, engage with us. We have 15 amazing community colleges willing and ready to provide those services, so work with us.
You know, and I think the point is perfect. Working together is what it all comes down to. And Ryan, you're a little over a year and a half into your job. As I mentioned with the governor, I view the department as still in its infancy. But part of what we got to do is have willing partners within the business community to help develop that strategic pathway and accelerate. So how can that happen?
Well, I think, you know, if you're going to hear a common theme up here on the stage today, it's going to be consistency in that collaboration. Consistency. I think you can point to any time throughout the history of you know, I'd say the last 10 years of some of the workforce issues that we're facing right now, where there have been great ideas, there have been some great programs. We just as a state have never, I think in my opinion, haven't done it as consistently as we could. And so that collaboration has to be consistent, that communication. I know Dr. Rankins has mentioned that too. The consistency of that communication has to be there. Part of the reason why I think we exist was to try to help coalesce a lot of that collaboration. That's why we have the ecosystem model that we do, and trying to build that out so that our partners have access certainly to us, but really more importantly, and this is going to sound selfish, that I have access to you. I was fortunate yesterday to get to talk to the MEC board, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that. And along the way, I had some very, I think, good questions, and at some point, tough questions for me to consider. Mr. Lampton had questions, Mr. Harrison had some great points, I know Mr. Taylor brought up some interesting points that I have to consider. That's the input that we need, because you all are the experts. We need to be that teammate that can adjust and use the resources that we've been given authority over to make sure that we're making strategy that works for the very specific needs that you have in the business community. The only way that happens is with consistent collaboration. And as our ecosystem model continues to grow, and I believe build trust amongst businesses and our teammates, I think you're going to see that consistency become more of a reality.
And consistency has been the success of what's been happening, particularly I think at Gulf Coast, Mary, with some of the things y'all are doing in terms of developing programs, whether it's shipbuilding, nursing, or now, as the governor mentioned, diesel mechanics. You're playing a vital role in providing qualified employees. What makes that so successful, and how do businesses participate in that?
Well, I think the main thing you do is that there's not a one-size-fits-all, and so you have to work with the individual business or industry to customize. I mean, we have a menu of opportunities for training, but we have to make sure it meets the needs of that individual industry. And of course, you have to have the right people having the conversation with business and industry. We call it business speak. We're educators, so we need to make sure we speak the same language as business and industry, and we truly hear what they're saying and understand what they need. And then we take that information and we actually do something with it. We're responsive, and we give them the training program that they need. And we at Gulf Coast, and I know the other community colleges do this as well, we evaluate, we do a pulse check, if you will, on all of our career and technical programs and our workforce programs to make sure, again, that they're still relevant, that we're getting the outcomes that we anticipated when we started the programs, to make sure that we're doing the job we need to do for business and industry. And then last, certainly but not least, is to make sure that we continue to walk with business and industry, because after, say, 6 months or a year, we want to make sure that we're still there as a partner, still making sure those outcomes are good. We revamp as we need to. Again, I use the term relevant. We had our spring meeting yesterday. All of our faculty were back, and our whole topic was being responsive and relevant. You think about Kodak. What happened to Kodak? Well, your cell phone sitting in front of you. Think about taxis, Uber, think about Blockbuster, so Netflix. So if you think about, we don't want to be in a situation ever at the community college level or at any level in Mississippi where we become irrelevant to people. So we need to make sure we stay current, we continue to reevaluate, we follow up, we work with business and industry. If they had a good or bad experience, we need to know it. Don't just walk away from us. Let us fix the problem. We're workforce solutions mindset. So we want to be that training arm for business and industry. We're tasked with doing that. And when I say training, I don't, it could be welding, it could be nursing, but it's also education. Your first 2 years on the academic track and move on into the university. So we have a lot of opportunities right at your back door in the community college system.
And you mentioned the actual system of the 15 community colleges across the state. So these are similar partnerships that businesses are open to building with those as well, correct?
Absolutely. Some of the strongest workforce training throughout, and the way the Mississippi system is set up, there are 15 community colleges. We try to mirror the needs of business and industry in our districts or in our area. That doesn't mean that we don't help each other if there's a need, but if we're heavy energy, shipbuilding, healthcare, then we're focused on that in our district. And then other districts have other needs in manufacturing and, you fill in the blank. So we're all tasked with making sure that we respond to our local needs and then work with our sister institutions to provide statewide training.
And that's so important. And you talked about the moving on to the next level of education. And Al, I kind of want to talk about that because, part of what the community college system is designed to do is move them into the next level, the next step of their education. And we've seen that on the academic side, but we're also starting to see that a little more from a career technical standpoint, particularly with the Allied Science Bachelor program that's been created that allows students that are working professionals to transfer hours that may have been in an applied science degree that was more of a career technical. How has that been received in terms of helping people get that next level, and what's happening from that perspective at our universities across the state?
Well, I'll tell you, Scott, this has been a big deal for our state. For many years, students in the academic track at our community colleges here in the state could transfer those hours to our 8 universities. We've had a long-standing great partnership with our community colleges, and we're really a leader here in the state when it comes to the seamless articulation of courses from our public community colleges to our public universities. However, about half of the students in our community college system are in our career technical track. That's a lot of students, and previously they could not transfer those career technical hours into our academic programs at our universities. We heard from students, we heard from our partners within the community college system, and we heard from you. And our board decided to address this issue. So in 2019, our board decided to approve an applied baccalaureate degree to be offered at all 8 of our universities. Creating a pathway was important to meet the need of working professionals who may have had the Associate of Applied Science degree from a Mississippi community college, but for career advancement reasons, for additional training needs, or just if it was a personal goal, they needed that BS level degree, and our board addressed that issue in partnering with our community college system. And I think so far it's been a great program for our state and has filled a hole where we had a tremendous need.
Are there opportunities for businesses to take part in helping make these programs successful, making sure the type of training and education and classes are taught? How can they get involved? How can they be part of that process?
I think our business leaders can continue to engage and let us know where the gaps are, where we need to make adjustments to strengthen our workforce, to make sure that we have a workforce that's ready for the jobs of today and for the jobs of the future.
Ryan, real quick, I want to talk a little bit about what Accelerate is doing in terms of developing kind of our ecosystems across the state that are focused on certain parts of the state and what those needs are. First, how's that process going? And then secondly, how do businesses connect with these ecosystems to kind of create that collaboration necessary for us to have a successful program?
So first of all, the question of how it's going, excuse me, how it's going, it's still going. It's ongoing. I think the development of the ecosystem is going to be a perpetual thing because I think, as Dr. Graham has said, and Dr. Rankins, this is an ongoing learning process. As industry changes, we too have to be nimble and versatile to change with it. You know, the ecosystems, for those of you that aren't aware, that designed truly to be able to address the ubiquitous problems that face the state, those common denominators that all industry seems to face around the state, but allow us also to pay attention to those specific needs of each micro region of the state of Mississippi. We have 8 ecosystems as we see it, and now thankfully have 10 ecosystem coordinators, teammates of mine, that now live in those communities and can be that first point of contact to industry, to educational partners. And I'm going to tell you that Dr. Graham is one of the best at what they do, what she does on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, at having her ear to the rail of what the industry needs are. And it's been a blessing for us to learn from their abilities and certainly what they've done over the years on the Gulf Coast. But it's an ongoing process of developing trust and developing those lines of communication. The governor said, you know, talking about hitting home runs or base hits, I mentioned to somebody out here, some days I feel like I'm hit by the pitch, but I still get on base. We are going very slowly, and we're trying to do this one step at a time, developing trust with the businesses in those communities, with our new coordinators, developing those lines of communication to our academic partners. One example, a success story that I would point to, just within the last 48 hours, you've seen Pearl River Community College. Rebecca Brown and the workforce office down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, in their Hattiesburg campus, a workforce enhancement training fund that we, along with the community college board, were able to award to Pearl River Community College, allowed incumbent workers in that area, nearly 300, to have new skills developed through increased manufacturing courses through the community college. Those are people working at companies like Kohler and others in that area. That would not have happened if we did not have a good relationship with the likes of Rebecca Brown at Pearl River. It would not have happened if we didn't have Todd Jackson and Chad Newell from ADP at the table. It would not have happened were we not to have Southern Miss at the table saying, in our ecosystem, in this region, here are the specific needs that we see, or specific challenges that we're facing. Here are the needs that we have, and here's some of our ideas of how we could solve that. Now, Accelerate, you as the state entity, can you help us, resource us, to give us what we need to meet those challenges? So the ecosystems continue to develop. They will always be developing because that will always need to be nimble and change with the growing needs of industry. But I think it's going well. We have a lot more work to do, though, and hopefully we'll get more base hits than getting hit by pitches, but we'll see.
Well, it's amazing the work that's taken place in a very short period of time, and again, I think that, you know, I look across the room, I know a lot of people have been involved in that process, and we really feel like we're headed in the right direction and want to be there. I've got one final question I want to ask each of you, and it's going to say, it's real simple. If there was, you look across the room, I mean, I'm excited to see everybody back together again. I'm also excited to see kind of a standing room only crowd here at our morning session. It's been a rough couple of years getting people together, and we're starting to get back to normal. But the one thing that we want to do is help. And if there was one thing that you could ask business leaders that are in this room today to do for you, to help you be successful in preparing our workforce and improving education, what would that be? And Al, I'll start with you.
Well, you know, identifying problems is not a failure. It's not an indictment on the current work. It's a part of continuous improvement. And I think we just need to continue to talk and have real conversations about identifying barriers, tearing those barriers down, and putting our best foot forward and helping to move our great state forward. So let's just continue to talk and have dialogue.
Mary?
You know, I can't just give you one answer there. First and foremost, you know, engage and partner with your local community college. So often we have a preconceived notion of what's going on in your local community college. But if you take an opportunity to actually visit a campus and walk through their career and technical programs, their workforce training programs, you'll be amazed at the resources and amazed at the level of expertise that's available for each and every one of our business and industries. And again, we can customize that as we need to. I have to tell you folks, there's not a training deficit. We have lots of training opportunities. There's really no need for any industry to stand up their own individualized training without the support of the community colleges, because we have the connection for all of the different resources that are coming through the state. We speak business. We can help you line up all those resources to make sure you get the training experience you need. We want to walk with you in this endeavor. We want to collaborate with you because, again, it's our responsibility to do that, but we need you to engage with us and work with us so we can provide the best product, so that you can get the trained workers that you need. We don't have a training offering opportunity. We have a people don't want to work issue. And so that's pretty simplistic. But so rather than start your own training, if you will work with us, we'll help do the training, and then you can incentivize people to participate in the training. That's what we need. Help us market the training, help encourage people to be a part of that training. We can do it on your site, or we could do it at the community college. So I'm a little biased. Jay Allen, who's here, he and I serve on the National Community College Board, and Jay would agree we have the best community college system in the United States. So let us help you.
Ryan, bring us home.
Well, I would say just in closing, the engagement piece that they've both talked about is certainly that I'll address as well. I will say not only stay engaged with your community colleges, with your four-year institutions. I failed to answer the last question that you asked me a few moments ago. Please go to our website, acceleratems.org, and you will see the ecosystem coordinator that is keyed to your individual ecosystem. That's an individual phone number, email address, a face, a name. That will be the person in your ecosystem that we want to be your teammate, hands, feet, eyes, a servant-hearted leader that's there to help make some of these connections. I would say stay engaged with groups like MEC, stay engaged with groups like MMA. We get a lot of communication between Scott and John about some of their constituencies and some of the overarching needs that the state is facing. Our ecosystem coordinators can help with the more specific needs. But then I would say, lastly, be specific. If you as a company have a need for workforce, try to drill that down to the basic, most specific needs that you have, because the more specific we can get, the faster I think groups like Mary's unbelievable team on the coast, or Rebecca Brown at Pearl River can respond. So the more specificity to the needs, the faster that we can respond as a partnership.
Well, I want to then thank each of y'all for being with us today. Having your insight is so important. I think that we are really making great strides. I think continuing to work together, the collaboration, which is what the focus of today's meeting is all about, is so vital for that. And I appreciate each of you taking time to be with us this morning, and we look forward to continuing to work with you as we go on the road. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you very much.
And joining us in just a minute after a couple of messages from our sponsors, we're going to have Jason Word talk a little bit about what's happening at MEC as we get into the legislative session.
It's the sizzle in your bacon, the comfort in your cozy socks, the heat that can't be beat. With natural gas, saving money just feels natural. Atmos Energy, your natural gas company. It's the
Health has always been reactive, focused on fixing problems as they happen. But with Blue Primary Care, we're taking a proactive approach. working with you to help you understand your health and empowering you to be healthy. It's time to prioritize you, your health, and your life. The results? Less worrying and more living. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue.
Okay, joining us now is Jason Word, our Manager of Public Policy. I know that this is a lot of fun. We're going to try to move fast to keep going here, but Jason, the session is upon us. Are you ready?
Good morning. Yes, certainly. This is a very exciting time of the year.
Well, you know, the next 3 months can be really, really fun, but it can also be it can be very hectic. You know, one of the long-standing traditions we have at MEC is our legislative scramblers.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about what's happening with those, because we're getting back to our normal routine with scramblers this year, correct?
Correct. Scott, as you mentioned about our MEC's Breakfast Scrambler, we've actually been on hiatus for about 2 years as a result of the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, we're back to normal. Typically, we host 5 breakfast events during the legislative session located at the Museum of Art, where our guests are afforded the opportunity to connect with Mississippi legislators regarding the comings and goings and happenings at the Capitol, accompanied by a wonderful breakfast. That may be the most important.
Yeah. Good food.
Yes, exactly. Fortunately, this year, in the last few years, if you're not able to attend in person, we do have a live stream option. We offer for all of our members and non-members that can't attend. They can watch from the comfort of their home or their office. So be on the lookout for that. And typically, Jones Walker is our first sponsor of the year. We'll feature updates from our appropriation chairs, and that will be Wednesday, January 18th, so it's coming up. Doors will be open around 7:15 or so, and be on the lookout for further updates about other Scrambler events.
Just a couple of weeks away, and we'll start that process. So, but I mean, things do move quickly from a legislative perspective. Can you fill us in on what's happening right now, and what the next few weeks mean for us?
Well, that is correct. There are several legislative deadlines coming up, as even close as next week, whereas all general bills and constitutional amendments must be drafted by next Wednesday, followed by the introduction of those said bills on the following Monday.
And they come in fast and furious, don't they?
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah, I think, what did you tell me yesterday? We already had over 100 bills that have been filed.
Yes, over 200 bills within the House.
Over 200 already,
so
amazing. So you get to read a lot, right?
Yes, very much so, very much so.
Well, listen, last session you started doing something that was designed to help our members. You created what's called our Monday Fast Five. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that, why that's important, and how people can be part of that.
Well, Monday's Fast Five is a resource that we offer to MEC members to keep them connected and updated on pertinent legislative issues at the Capitol. Specifically, I'll select a few bills each week that are important to our membership and subsequently update them on this pertinent legislation as they move through the legislative process. Additionally, I'll add a fun fact tied to Mississippi legislative history and politics as well.
So if somebody, all of our members should be receiving that, but if for some reason they're not, what do they need to do?
Well, like I said, and you mentioned Monday's Fast Five is emailed directly to MEC's membership, but if you're not receiving that at this current time, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly at jword@msmec.com.
Well, Jason, thank you for kind of updating everybody. I know you're going to have a lot of fun hanging out in the Capitol here for the next couple of months, but at the end of the day, it's all about making sure we're focusing on MEC's issues and doing things that's going to move the business climate into an area that allows everybody to be successful. So absolutely. I appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Jason, thank you so much. And in just 1 minute, we're going to have a very special panel talking about how we work together to accomplish things at the legislature. So after these messages, we'll get started. let's roll. A couple of things I want to tell you before we get started with this panel. I'm very happy to have on the stage with me from the end going toward me is Gwen Howard, the Executive Director of the Mississippi Economic Development Council, John McKay, who's President and CEO of the Mississippi Manufacturers Association, and Derek Easley, the President and CEO of the BIPEC, which is the Business and Industry Political Education Committee. I talk regularly with all three of these to talk about what are key things happening at the legislature. Because what we learned a couple of years ago is partnerships matter. And it started really with a piece of legislation called the COVID Liability Business Protection Act. And it was an act that was going to make sure that we were protected from claims on COVID that there was no way to prove where it happened. And businesses did not need to be a target. And what we realized is by working together, we could accomplish a great piece of legislation. And I think what we got passed that year was probably the strongest and most recognized piece of legislation in the country. And it was a result of not only the partnership that we created among us, but it was also building a coalition of other organizations that made it happen. And I think that's why having these guys on stage with me right now, I'm extremely excited about this conversation to wrap up our session this morning, simply because as we look at this, working together allows us to accomplish a lot of great things. And, you know, there are a lot of things on the table each legislative session. And I'm going to start with one that we've all been involved in, and other people in the room have been equally involved in, and that's the internet-based software and remote software sales tax issue. About a little over a year ago, our Department of Revenue decided that they were going to start putting sales tax on this, and it created a lot of problems. And Derek, you've kind of been at the tip of the spear, if you will, on this issue. Can you kind of give us an overview of what this really is and why everybody in this room needs to understand it's important?
Sure. Thank you all for letting me be a part of this panel. I'm happy to kind of give the background on the issue, kind of how we got to where we are. Then I guess we can all kind of talk about what we learned over the past 16 months on this issue and why it's important for everybody in this room that we fix it. In September of 2021, the Department of Revenue amended an existing regulation that deals with computer equipment, software and sales. The amendments would have pretty significantly increased taxes on pretty much everybody in this room. We weighed in with DOR, we attended a hearing, we voiced our concerns, we raised enough questions that the Department of Revenue kind of pumped their brakes until we could get more input and answers. And this was in October of 2021, so we were right around the corner for the 2022 legislative session. So what we decided to do is introduce legislation that would essentially codify what we thought the existing rules were. And we kind of went back and forth with the Department of Revenue. Ultimately, that ended up in a study committee, which I ended up chairing, which is exactly how I wanted to spend my summer.
But you had so much fun.
Right. The Department of Revenue agreed to rescind their proposed regulation and wait on the study committee's recommendation to the legislature this year. That hasn't exactly been the case, and they did rescind the regulation, but I still think, John can talk about this in a minute, I still think they're collecting taxes on this issue. So the committee, we conducted 9 meetings throughout the summer and early fall, and we don't have time to really go through exactly all of the findings of the committee. If you have trouble sleeping tonight, it's on our website. It's about 300 pages. This is one of the rare study committees that the legislature commissioned that actually went out and did the work. But long story short is, the bottom line is that this is a very complicated tax issue that all the states are dealing with. And we saw an opportunity to put Mississippi at a competitive advantage on this complicated issue. So our recommendation to the legislature this year is that Mississippi should eliminate sales tax on all software and related services when used as a business input. And that's kind of the background of how we got to where we are. And John, you may have some real life examples of how this affects your members.
Yeah, so I guess first and foremost, I just want to say I'm blessed to be up here representing manufacturers. We have a very manufacturing-intensive state, and I couldn't be more pleased to sort of be their voice in this conversation. And Derek's absolutely right. One of the more complicating factors of this whole thing is not only did the Department of Revenue try to amend their current regulations, but in fact what ended up happening is they rescinded those proposed changes, after we had some conversations. But unfortunately, what they had done in the previous, 1 to 2 years before the attempted change was they were issuing individual letters to companies, to vendors that sell this software and these services to companies, and told those vendors to start collecting a tax. Now, the regulation is very clear. It's in black and white. Anybody can go read it. That's against the regulation. So what ended up happening is they were doing something that was against the stated regulation. And we called them on it, but in order for us to kind of move the ball forward, we would have to undo everything they've already done. And so that really leads to what Derek described, and us taking a step back and really looking at, well, if we were going to start this from scratch, what should the policy of Mississippi be? Let's get the legislature to weigh in on this and really devote some time to thinking, how can we promote this as an economic development tool, an incentive to let companies, especially high-tech, intensive companies that use this type of software, that invest millions of dollars. I mean, just for one example, in the defense sector, a lot of defense contractors, in order to do business with the Department of Defense, you're required to have very, very high-end cybersecurity software. It's just a requirement, and you have to invest that capital. So if we're gonna, whether it's a federal requirement or whether it's just part of you doing business, we wanna make sure that you really get the advantage of not having to pay that sales tax. And really, for manufacturing, as most of you all know, manufacturing is a very high-tech sector. There are very few manufacturers these days that look like they did 40 years ago, and all of that change is driven by software. So as we move forward, again, we want to treat this as a major business input and almost like a raw material. You can't do the job. I mean, a robot in a factory cannot function without that software. So we really want to look at that and kind of be bold and step out there as a state and have this policy in place to really stand out amongst the states and attract those companies to Mississippi.
And you talked about the committee actually doing the work. John Fletcher, who was working with the committee, he's also on our board of governors, talked to our board yesterday. He brought the report with him. It's about this thick. He offered it out if anyone wanted. I don't think anybody took him up on that offer, but so the work is done. So what's the next step? I mean,
well, the next step is we have crafted legislation. We have met with leadership, House, Senate, and the governor's office to explain our position on this issue. I will say, especially on the House and Senate side and in the governor's office, they understand that this is something that needs to be addressed. So I think John and Kelly Wright, who works with John, met with Senator Harkins yesterday to walk through the issue. I know Clark Wise, who represents the realtors, has met with Chairman Lamar on the House side. So our goal is to get this legislation moving and, again, provide certainty in a very complicated issue. And, again, I never thought I'd be even somewhat of an expert on software and software tax issues. But one example that kept coming up that I've used anytime I've talked to different groups, I see Mr. Taylor sitting here in the front. He asked a specific question at one of our meetings. He said, what if there's a natural disaster that comes through Louisville and disrupts my operation, which happened? And I have spent the money in Kentucky for redundancies so that if this were to happen again, I can flip a switch and put everything back online at Taylor Machineries. According to the Department of Revenue, when he flips that switch, that becomes a taxable event in the state of Mississippi. That's just one example of what we're trying to prevent. But to answer your question further, Scott, the legislation has been introduced. We don't have a bill number yet. There's usually a backlog at this time at the beginning of the session. But our goal is to get both pieces of legislation moving, and hopefully one of them will make it across the finish line.
Well, that's true. I mean, you heard Jason mention there's already 200 in the first day on the House side of bills introduced. So we got a lot of things to wade through there. Gwen, I want to go to you real quick and talk a little bit about economic development. And last year one of the priorities was getting MFLEX, our incentive plan for flexible tax incentives, passed. Why was it so important to do that, and why must we continue to look at ways to improve that as we go forward?
Yeah, Well, first, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to get to bring economic development to a part of this conversation. And I just want to commend y'all for our partnership and being able to continue to address barriers that are in the way to be a business-friendly climate, as well as identifying areas that we can be competitive. Inflex was one of those, and Scott, as you know from the 2014 competitiveness study that we partnered together to do, we looked at several different areas that we could improve on in the state and take advantage of, and our incentives were one of those. That is just one piece of the recruitment tool, and they looked at our incentives and shared that we have some great incentives in place, but they really need to be streamlined. At that time, they were compartmentalized, and it was very hard to actually access and utilize those the way they were intended. So with our local economic developers that really spearheaded this initiative over the past 5 years, that we were able to get that legislation produced that we now know as Inflex, and with the support of Lieutenant Governor Hoseman, the Senate and the House, we now are able to celebrate Inflex and have that as a tool in our box. But it really was a game changer for economic development, recruitment, and retention. But as we continue to look at it, we have to acknowledge that Mississippi is successful with economic development because we don't let these tools get stagnant and outdated. We're continuously looking at how they measure up against our competition, our neighboring states. And so we have to do that with Inflex as well. It was intended to be here as a tool, and so as things change and our competition sees what we have available and they look at that, we have to make sure that Inflex is addressed as well.
Well, thank you for again, that was something that I think we all saw as needed. Part of us being successful is having a strong track structure, having the ability to have incentives. But John, you and I both serve on the Emergency Road and Bridge Repair Fund Advisory Committee, and what we've seen is almost $5 million have been put into local roads and bridges over the last $500 million. Thank you. Yeah. 500 million. I had 5 wouldn't do a whole lot, would it? But we're to continue to focus. Why is this so important, particularly from a manufacturing perspective, for roads to be really up to what they need to be?
Absolutely, and I appreciate that question, Scott. And I saw our fearless chairman, Mike McCormick, with Farm Bureau here earlier, and he's done a great job, along with the entire makeup of that advisory group. And again, I want to highlight, this is another, you heard the panel up here earlier talking about it, this is another example of collaboration. So we were able to put in the initial piece of funding, that bonded project a few years ago, this advisory group, and it's a cross-section of business and industry and ag interests and local governments and all these folks that understand the need. And so certainly for manufacturers, you could imagine that in order to get raw material and component parts into the facility is incredibly important, as well as getting the raw material out. And so with this program, at the time that this was instituted, we were having, I think it was well over 100 bridges were posted either closed or reduced weight, which made them non-functional. So trucks were having to go out of the way, all the deliveries were delayed. It was really a problem. And a lot of it was isolated on those local systems. And those local systems, quite frankly, just didn't have the funding available to address the problem. So by putting this, thanks to the legislature and the leadership over there, they were able to put this money in place, and through this advisory council and the great leadership at MDOT, I want to commend them, and certainly Brad White's over there now and is doing a fantastic job with that team. They brought the technical expertise to the table. We brought our economic development lens to the table, and through pretty complicated formula, able to really dole out those projects to the highest and best use. I mean, certainly we want industry to flourish, we want our ag sector to flourish, we want, just the everyday commuters, school buses, all of these things. I mean, safety and economic growth and development are the keys here. And again, I think it's that partnership and that collaboration that really makes it happen.
And I think it's key for us to continue to push for that type of funding as we go forward. And Gwen, highways, they matter from an economic development standpoint as well. I mean, site selectors will tell you that, correct?
Highways and all of our infrastructure, it is a pertinent factor when they are looking at sites for their clients. They're going to identify that site, but then Governor Reeves talked about this earlier, speed to market. As soon as they're looking for a site, they are looking to solve problems that happened 2 years ago. So speed to market is more important than it ever has been. And so when they look at that, they're looking at how are they going to get their products and their materials into that site and then get that end product distributed quickly. So highways are a huge piece of that site selection process. But you can't talk about highways without talking about the piece we already mentioned, which is sites. If I was a motivational speaker, I would do what Laura tells me in every email and say, sites, sites, sites. It is what we are preaching right now. They're not going to look at our highways if we don't have a product. So we have to continue through our utilities and our legislature that has been so supportive of this. We have to continue to grow that site program that's administered through MDA.
Well, thank you so much for mentioning that, because, I mean, we heard the governor talk about it this morning. We know it is really important. Now, the one thing we haven't touched on, every 4 years, when it's an election year, all we hear, oh, the legislature's not going to do much because it's election year. That never seems to be the case. Derek, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing and kind of what might be ahead for us as we look at elections as we head into this year.
Sure. Well, you do hear that every 4 years. It's an election year, not a whole lot's going to get done. It usually doesn't work out. It usually there's quite a bit of activity. In my opinion, as long as they just take care of our software bill, they can go home. But yes, it is an election year, and the first thing to note, there's currently 2 open seats in the House. Jim Beckett from Bruce was appointed by the governor to the public utilities staff, so that special election is actually next Tuesday. Representative Deborah Gibbs from here in Jackson, she won an election to become a circuit judge, so I don't think the governor's called that special election date yet. So we're starting off, we've got 2 open seats before we even get into the election year. As far as the 2023 regular elections, there's at least 12 confirmed open House seats. I think there could be more. I would note that this includes 2 new seats that are a result of the census and redistricting. In the Senate right now, I think the only incumbent senator who's announced that he's not running for re-election is Senator Chris Kaufman. But there are 2 new seats in the Senate as well as a result of redistricting. And there is 1 incumbent running for one of the new seats. So for comparison, as of now, these numbers are down compared to 4 years ago. There's quite a bit of turnover. In 2019, there were 12 open seats in the Senate as compared to 1 right now, and 16 in the House, which compared to 12. So it appears there's always going to be some surprises. The qualifying deadline is at the end of this month, and I expect those numbers to go up, but it's an exciting time for BIPAC. A lot of folks ask about who is BIPAC, what do y'all do? I was like, well, an election year when you go to the mailbox and you're like, man, I'm tired of all this direct mail. Sorry, that's us. But we're doing it for a good reason. We're trying to elect men and women who appreciate what folks in this room do and pass laws that help our economy grow. So I'm proud to represent BIPAC in that capacity and trying to accomplish those goals.
Well, there's probably a couple of more things other than just the tax bill that we need to address, but that is very important without question. So we'll be here a little longer, but we've got about 2 minutes left. I want to just do a little quick rapid fire, just a real quick answer. And I'll start with you, Gwen. Workforce, the importance as it relates to economic development.
Well, I will start by saying I think it's unfair to put workforce under rapid fire, but I'll give it the best shot. So, workforce development, I will just leave y'all with this. Site selectors, when they're looking, they're going to ask about what your workforce is, what that pipeline is. I heard from our friend George Freeland in Jackson County recently, and he said if you're talking about economic development, you have to have workforce development at the center of that conversation. And so if we want to win at economic development, we have to win at workforce development. So, I want to commend Accelerate for getting career coaches into 125 of our schools this past year. They're a very young organization, and they are really going leaps and bounds to make sure that we meet those goals and can win in workforce and economic development.
John, healthcare as it relates to business and industry.
Certainly healthcare is a major issue and concern, and you're going to see the legislature and political leaders discuss and debate and pass legislation this year on healthcare, and it's such a broad and complicated topic. But I will just say that we do an occasional survey with our membership, and as you might expect, workforce and finding qualified employees is always number one, and it is in our last survey. But surprisingly, the cost of healthcare for our membership rose to the second most concerning issue for them. And as I'm sure all of you have seen with your own businesses and even personally, the cost of insurance and certainly providing that insurance to your employees is continually rising. And then this isn't a new phenomenon, but it seems to be more acute now, and that's something that we want to address. And look, we have partners across the board, whether it's insurance companies, whether it's the provider networks. All of those things are very important, and we want to be a partner to all of them. But at the end of the day, especially in the manufacturing sector, which provides the highest level of benefits probably of any sector in the state, we want to be very aware that those cost pressures are very real. And there's really only two ways to address them if they keep going up. The employer has to absorb those costs, which then goes into that bottom line. Either they've got to increase the cost of their goods or they have to absorb it. Or they have to pass that on to the employees, which again could potentially make it unaffordable for those folks. So it's a very, very important issue, and it's something that we're going to keep our eye on and again, try to work with legislative leaders on ways to bring those cost pressures down for everybody across the board, but certainly for employers that provide those benefits to their employees.
Initiative referendum. Derek, is it going to happen this year?
I don't know. We'll see. Of course, in 2021, our Supreme Court had a decision that essentially did away with the ballot initiative process in Mississippi. Last year's legislative session, there were bills introduced, there were negotiations. Ultimately, the House and Senate just couldn't agree on a final product. I will say, I think one thing that they do agree on is that whatever ultimately passes the legislature, that the ballot initiative should be an opportunity to change existing statute or add statute, not the Constitution, which I think is a good thing. If the legislature can come to an agreement this year, then it could actually be on the ballot in November for the public to decide, to approve whatever agreement they come up with. If that were to happen, then in 2024 would actually be the first opportunity for a group who would like to put something on the ballot following whatever the new rules are. That'd be the first opportunity, would be 2024, if the legislature were to act this year.
And I'm going to take the last one. It's student financial aid. We've been doing a lot of work looking at this, and I will tell you, there's proposals on the table to increase the amount of state aid, but really focusing on non-traditional part-time students, which we believe is going to help us, particularly in the career technical industry training sector, and it's something that we're going to be paying close attention to as we go forward. So we've covered a lot of topics today with this group, and I think as we go through the rest of this legislative session, I think we'll all be sending out information to our members, and many of you are members of multiple organizations that are represented here, and we just appreciate y'all being interested in these issues and helping us really move them forward as we go into the session. So again, thanks to each of you for being with us this morning, and I really appreciate the partnership that we've developed, and we are going to continue to work to make great things happen for our state as we go forward. So thank y'all so much.
Thanks, Scott.
There's big changes coming your way. You can't wait to meet him, and he can't wait to meet you. Our women's wellness homes are here to empower you, to give your baby the best possible start to life. Before, during, and after. The result? Less worrying and more living. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue. There's big changes coming your way. You can't wait to meet him, and he can't wait to meet you. Our women's wellness homes are here to
Thank y'all so much. We appreciate y'all being here at the morning session. We have buses lined up outside. We're ready to go to the Capitol. We're going to hear from our Lieutenant Governor. We're going to hear from the Speaker of the House, as well as other legislative leaders. We look forward to seeing you there. It's in room 216. Just come on, grab a seat. We'll get started as soon as everybody's in the room. Thank y'all again for being part of Capitol Day.